Hi, my name is Gina White. I'm an encaustic artist living in St. Pete, and I'm really excited to share with you a little bit about my show, Advent, Now and the Not Yet. So, the Franciscan Center in Tampa, Florida, asked me to do an Advent show. And I quickly said, yes, that sounds great. And then I realized I really didn't know much about it at all. So the only thing I really knew about Advent was that it spanned the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And my mom used to get me those Advent calendars that you'd poke around the windows and find chocolate. So that was the countdown to me, for me, that was like the countdown to Christmas. So I looked a little bit into it and I found a book by Fleming Rutledge called Advent, the Once and Future Coming of Jesus Christ. It was a collection of her sermons and writings that spanned from the 1970s when she first started to the present day. And within that book, it kind of helped me build a framework or a guiding thesis for a structure of the show. And so I'll take out those little snippets that were in her words. She could say it much better than I could. So the first idea was that in a very deep sense, the entire Christian life in this world is lived in Advent between the first and second comings of the Lord, in the midst of the tension between the way things are, or the way things they are, and the way things they ought to be. So that was the first idea. The second idea was that Advent tells us that Christmas is not really Christmas, if we're all we were thinking about is the nice little baby. And then the third idea um, is in our sins we have been a long time, and the Advent begins in the dark. That Advent is the final breaking in of God upon our darkness. So putting all those ideas together, Advent is a process of preparation. It's not measured in the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas, but it's in lifetimes and generations throughout humanity's history. And during in these writings, in her sermons and the writings, she references several times a poem, a specific poem that reflects these ideas. And that is For the Time Being. It's a Christmas oratorio written by W.H. Auden. And he was a predecessor of Rutledge, and he wrote this poem. It's a 50-page poem. He wrote it in during World War II between 1941 and 42. And it's a contemporary retelling of the Nativity story. And it spans not just the Nativity story, but the season of Advent and the time in which we find ourselves. So putting these things together, I use the poems to help me with the content of the show, and the pieces. Each piece reflects a portion of the poem. So I would just pick out snippets, and we'll go through that. But Rutledge gave me the structure. So there's three movements, you might call them. So the first three pieces, there's 10 pieces in the show. There's first three pieces reflect the beginning of humanity's history and what went wrong and why we even need to be rescued or why this plan had to be enacted. The second three is the middle. That's what we would call Christmas, the nativity story itself. That's God's plan and what he did, how his plan, what he wanted to do to right these wrongs and to fix things. And then the four final pieces reflect where we find ourselves today. And it's the now and the not yet, where what we can do and what we can expect in this time that we find ourselves in which we find them. So Auden talks a little bit about an active waiting and how it's not just we're sitting around twiddling our thumbs, but that we anticipate, we know how things are going to end, but we're not there yet. And what do we do in the meantime? So that's the structure. And I use the garden as a symbol throughout the show. And that's kind of a nod to the Garden of Eden because that's the space where heaven and earth met. And it's where the space where the relationship between God and humans was whole and the way it was supposed to be created. It was the way it was created to be, which of course lasted like 5 seconds and then went off the rails on page 3 of the Bible. But God didn't leave us hopeless. He promised to fix it. And he was going to send the seed of the woman who would make things right again. And of course, we didn't know what that looked like, who that was, but from that moment, humans were looking for that unnamed person. So each piece in the show is made of encaustic paint. It's an encaustic painting. And for those of you who aren't familiar, encaustic is beeswax mixed with tree resin and melted. And then there's pigment, like powdered pigment, put in to make it a paint. And then you melt all these things, like I'd mentioned. And I paint on a griddle, a pancake griddle, and I melt the wax and paint on a panel. So we're going to start with the beginning movement, the first movement. So each piece is paired with a portion of Auden's poem. I won't go into all of it, but on my website, I have the section that I pulled out, and some of them I pulled out a little bit more than what inspired me, but just to give the person context and when they're reading it. But I'm going to tease out the particular sections that were really that like kind of struck me. So this piece is called Winter's Age. It's an encaustic and fabric piece on wood panel. It's around 20 by 24. So the two portions of that snippet that I just showed you before that really struck me, darkness and snow descend. The clock on the mantelpiece has nothing to recommend. The prophet's lantern is out and gone the boundary stone. Cold the heart and cold the stove. Ice condenses on the bone. Winter completes an age. So for me, Auden was really conveying long spans of time, millennia. Like this was, people were waiting. This is when we were waiting and waiting and waiting for this promise, and it, didn't happen right away. And Rutledge actually talks about that too in one of the things that I told you it really struck me, where she says, "In our sins we've been a long time. Advent begins in the dark." So this is not. This just speaks to the fact that Advent is a long, long period of time since the dawn of humanity. Layers of wax and flowers and pieces of metal are buried beneath the surface. And then cheesecloth fabric soaked in wax and draped on the wood panel. I did try to also convey like a winter, if you're ever been up north and you've been inside during a snowstorm, there's this feeling of quiet and timelessness, like time just stands still and sounds are just muffled. And if you look outside and you happen to see organic things like a garden or flowers, everything looks dead. And like you think there's no way this possibly can come back to life again. But it does. And so there's always hope, even though things look bleak. The second piece is called Dreadful Wood. It's an encaustic metal and fabric on wood panel, and it's a 20 by 28. That is why we despair. We are afraid of pain, but more afraid of silence. Alone, alone about a dreadful wood of conscious evil runs a lost mankind. So this piece is designed to be kind of like a zoom in on the last piece. So we saw from far away that, we've been waiting. So now this is a zoom in, and we don't wait well. We're not a patient race, or we're not, humanity is not patient. So we've attempted, goodness and filling in that relational hole. And they've not gone well. Our attempts become twisted and broken. And this is a nod to a garden, but it is it's man-made. So it's never going to be like the original or the source. So this is barbed wire, rusted metal, designed to look kind of like flower-ish. And this is fabric that is soaked in wax. This third piece in this first movement is called The Secret Garden. It's an encaustic and Tyvek on wood panel, and it's a 20 by 20. I painted on the inside of a cradled panel, so it's kind of deep inside, and then I coated or I layered on top a piece of Tyvek to give it like some three-dimensionality. This quote is again from Auden, "For the garden is the only place there is, but you will not find it unless you have looked for it everywhere and found nowhere that is not a desert." So this is part of the idea that, yeah, again, the garden was the place where heaven and earth met and the God and human relationship was whole. But we have seen glimpses of goodness, and not everything has been horrifying. But those little glimpses have been just that, glimpses. They're short-lived, but there have been these times of beauty. And so, like I said, there's Tyvek on top that I just nailed onto the edges of the piece. So there's a space between the base of the panel and this Tyvek. There's like it's 2 inches or so, and so you can see deep inside it. There's I have embroidered some garden motif onto cheesecloth, and then I've also painted different pieces, pictures of flowers and things like that, and use gold leaf to highlight it all. Um, so it's bubbled because I heated it with a blowtorch and created the holes as well. So now we're in the middle movement. That's what we would call the Nativity or Christmas. This is God's plan and how he decided to fix things and right all the wrongs. So this is called the Annunciation. It's an encaustic and fabric on wood panel, and it's 20 by 20. Excuse me. The garden is unchanged. The silence is unbroken. None may wake there, but one who shall be woken. Wake. So God came up with this radical plan to come fix things himself and breaking that barrier of the invisible, inaccessible garden. This is not what anybody expected, but that's what happened. And so this piece is kind of a nod to the fact that, again, that garden was inaccessible to Adam and Eve after the fall. And also, if you look forward to when Jesus died and that temple curtain was torn, both of those things, both of those illustrations show that there is now no separation between us and because of Jesus. And so, we now are able to create that whole relationship with God. Whereas the last piece, the secret garden, there was just these little glimmers of opening. This is like the full-on open. So this, just close up, is, wax inside, and it's incised, coated with some pigment stick, oil paints. And then this is cheesecloth soaked in wax, gives it that like rough and ready kind of lumpy appearance. And that's that veil being torn. So this is called the choosing. This is the time when the angel Gabriel came to Mary and told her God's plan and her part in it. God did not need a 14-year-old girl to make his plan happen. He could have done it any way he wanted, and he certainly didn't need her, but he chose to involve humanity and partner with us in this. And she didn't have to choose, or she didn't have to agree to it, but she did. So this is Auden's nod to that and how, Eve made some choices that kind of derailed us. But don't get too mad at Eve because that could have been any one of us. But Mary did. She is, in Gabriel's words, it lies within her power of choosing to conceive the child who chooses you. And, the negation of what Eve wounded, her affirmation will heal today. So in the background, you see Eve. Let me just, I think there's a closer up. Yes. So it's a shadow or silhouette of Eve reaching up to the tree. And then in the foreground is Mary in that, like again, like the symbolically, she's a flower, the garden, because her choice became a starting point for that garden to regrow. So here's the tree in the background. So this is the vision of the shepherds. This is, during that time at the nativity story where the angels sang and a choir of angels sang to the shepherds. Um, this also reminded me a little bit of what Rutledge talks about at the very beginning. We mentioned it, where Advent is the final breaking in of God upon our darkness. So this is just that flash of light, and the angelic choir just out of nowhere just starts singing. I'm sure scaring those poor shepherds. But this flower is kind of like a flower meets a flame, and it is. Kind of just like a flash of glory. And it's supposed to be like the undisguised revelation of what this humble birth actually was and what it meant to humanity and who it was that was being born. Um, so the bottom part here, this is paint, encaustic paint. This bottom part is Tyvek again, coated in wax and heated to manipulate the shape into the way I wanted it, which would be kind of like a bursting out. That flower is supposed to be bursting out, with the arrival of Jesus on the scene. Okay, so now we're in that third movement, that final movement, that now, where we are now, and the not yet. So Jesus has come. We know that. We know what's to come, but we are not there yet. So we're in this waiting game, and it's a hopeful anticipation. So this is called The Flight into Egypt. It's an encaustic piece, 20 by 20, with paper clay. This is paper clay. And then the entire piece is encaustic, but I've also coated it with rust patina and iron and bronze and other kinds of patinas. And it is so Auden likens our time to that of Mary and Joseph and Jesus when they fled to Egypt and they had to wait. I'm sure they noticed some strange and unusual things about Jesus's birth and, things that made him special. But they had to depart quickly and go to Egypt and just wait. And so, whereas that vision of the shepherd's piece is this flame of glory and everything for everybody to see. This piece is kind of just like a quieter, like we're this is I tried to make this look like a pilot light. Let me just go over here for you. These are the two quotes. So we know what's to come. And again, we're sometimes impatient for things to move forward. So here it is. So I tried to make it look a little bit like a pilot light, like it was kind of waiting and there's potential for that flame of glory, but we're not ready yet. We're waiting. And so for us, I also created the flower, you'll notice, is on the outside now. There's no separation, there's no difference or things separating us from that relationship that we can have with God because of Jesus. So the patterns that I incised into this are kind of a nod to organic material like branches or twigs or things like that. And then there's flecks of red that kind of represent Jesus's future sacrifice. So these last three pieces are the last three stanzas of this 50-page poem that Auden wrote. And he broke down John 14:16, which is, he is the way, he is the truth, he is the life. That's one Bible verse. He broke it out into three sections and then made a little commentary on each in this stanza, kind of commenting on, like, offering hints, I would say, on how to actively wait and what our role is in this now and not yet age that we live. So all those other pieces were generally the same size, like 20 by 20-ish. These get consist or like they grow in size as, kind of climaxing at the very end with that last piece. So we'll start off with this. This is called the land. He is the way. Follow him through the land of unlikeness. You will see rare beasts and have unique adventures. This is likely referencing Plato's idea that St. Augustine adapted and named the region of unlikeness, which is a feeling of being separated or distanced from God on an individual level. Some people feel like God has said it and forget it. He's hands off. Or throughout history, people have talked about this. Like Blaise Pascal talks about how there's a God-shaped vacuum or a God-shaped hole in each of us, and how nothing would satisfy except for Him. So I think that um, Auden is talking about how we each have to process through those feelings and understand them ourselves. And once we do, we will get to that land. Of unique and rare beasts and adventures. It reminds me of one of my favorites, Mr. Rogers, who's always a classic. He said that deep within each of us is a spark of the divine, just waiting to be used to light up a dark space. And so that's really the focus of this piece. So these are with the doors open. The previous picture you saw was with the doors closed. And so this is the nod to Mr. Rogers' idea of the spark of the divine. And it's true. None of us have this ability to sustain our life, our breath without him. So it, we really do have to, again, like I said, process through that and go through those feelings. Um, the this part here, I'll show you a little closer up here. So the pattern here is that organic branch-like kind of pattern that you saw in the flight out of Egypt. So that's the inside. On the outside, I continue that pattern on the outside. Liken this to, it doesn't look like a person, obviously, but I tried to make it a nod to a person, where this would be kind of like the veining that you might see on the inside of skin. Just the whole piece is supposed to represent, an individual person and all of the things that, they struggle with. The second piece is called the spark. He is the truth. Seek him in the kingdom of anxiety, and you'll come to a great city that has expected your return for years. So the kingdom of anxiety is likely Auden's idea that he further developed in his later 130-page poem called The Age of Anxiety, which he wrote in 1944-45, or 45-46, I can't remember. But anyway, he got a Pulitzer Prize for it. And he really address that issue, where it references the isolation of humans from each other. Whereas that last piece was isolation of humans on an individual level from God. This is humanity from each other. And the spiritual emptiness people might feel, and purposelessness that, a lot of times after World War II, just really a lot of people had to kind of process through and deal with. Rutledge also talks about how the making of all things right again is a social or a corporate event. It's not an individual thing that a lot of times, Christianity seems to harp on. It is, we are have individual relationships with God, but also it's each other. We are, when God fixes all these wrongs, he's also going to fix the wrongs we've done to each other. And all those wrongs will be righted, and we're linked to each other. So for a close-up, you can see that that pathway is lined with those circles, which are a nod to that spark that we just talked about in that last piece, and how they're all connected, and we are all really joined together. Which leads us to this last piece. And this is Ubuntu, and it's a 36 by 36. It's in caustic and graphite on a cardboard panel. He is the life. Love him in the world of the flesh, and at your marriage, all its occasions shall dance for joy. So it's called Ubuntu because that's an African philosophy that was shared by Bishop Desmond Tutu. And he says, I am because we are, that my humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together. So this piece is created, it's mostly encaustic, but then you'll see I have embedded these blind contour portraiture drawings. So for those of you who don't know, a blind contour drawing is where an artist does not look at the paper and only looks at the subject. And so things get really wonky pretty quickly. So it never looks exactly like what you're trying to draw, but it's a muscle memory exercise. And so I embedded these wonky looking portraits that kind of show that we're all imperfect people. But you can see there's a person here. There's a lady here, there's her lips and her eye. But when we come together and we create community by sharing our divine sparks and sharing love and kindness, that's where God is, because God is love and He's the source of love. So this love that we create together creates beauty like the garden. And so those relationships, our relationships with each other and with God become whole again. So here's another portrait of a woman. There's a chin and the lips. And I think there's a few more here. There's an eye and a beard and a profile of a lady. So that is the final piece of the show. Thank you so much for joining me. If you wanted to see some of the poetry, I kind of glazed over some of them. But if you wanted to see some of that a little bit more or look into it or contact me, I'd love to talk to you or hear from you. But thank you again for joining me.